Oh, hello there. We're here with Rori. She is a doctor of physical therapy, elite level, internationally recognized powerlifter, and you have one of the best bench presses in the world. That's quite fancy that. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I did a little bit of an introduction, but I would like you to talk a little bit about yourself, about what you do, so we can get started with the interview.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. This has been kind of like a long time coming. We've been like internet friends for a while. And we're both in like completely different realms of fitness, which is fun kind of when you get this crossover. So I'm excited to be here. Like you said, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. And basically my background is really as a dancer. So I basically danced my whole life. And then like in college, not in college, actually in like the end of high school, my dad got me a gym membership because my parents got divorced and he didn't know what to do with me and my brother when he was working. And we like just had a car and had to do things after school aside from dance. So my dad got me and my brother a gym membership. So I'd take my brother to the gym, he'd play basketball, and I would go into the weight room. Okay. Initially, I would probably just like hang out and do cardio, but obviously there were like cute boys there. So that's how I got into the weights. So like I probably was like 16 when I picked up my first dumbbell, 16 or 17. And I kind of played around with weight training just for general fitness and physique through the beginning of college, where I transitioned from dance into triathlon and kind of always was in the weight room, 2 days a week or 3 days a week, in addition to all the stuff that I was doing for the actual sport that I was doing. And then I got into physical therapy school and I was always intrigued by the deadlift. And then in grad school, I'm actually he's now my husband, but he became my boyfriend in grad school for physical therapy. And we all had this like introduction day and he was like, oh, I lift barbells. This is like what I do for fun. And I was like, maybe he can teach me how to deadlift. So that was like my pickup line. And then when I was introduced to the barbell on this road to becoming a physical therapist, I really felt that the barbell lift, so the squat, bench press, deadlift, and overhead press, were the most functional exercises that you could possibly do. If you think about someone who, like a grandma who has difficulty getting up out of a chair or sitting down on the toilet.
A mom, like a breastfeeding mom, needs to get out of the couch holding a baby.
Right.
There is nothing more functional than that. Like
that's a squat.
It's funny that you're saying that because I was thinking about that the other day, because I always have to pick up my kids surfboard style because they're always throwing a tantrum somewhere. And like I would drop my keys. I have to put one under my armpit and then lunge to get my keys and get back up without dying. And like whenever you start to think about it, you need these movements not only for performance, but to perform on your day-to-day life.
Exactly. Once I was put under the barbell and realized how important progressive overload is and these movements are towards being a fully functioning human or the best functioning person that you can be physically, I was kind of set on like putting the traditional model of physical therapy behind me and moving forward with this active, progressive type of physical therapy. Yeah. And so people kind of just started asking me questions and I started helping people, randomly, and then I was like, oh, I guess I could turn this into a business.
I like how you mentioned about functionality because one of the main things, like I think that functional training is kind of like the hot thing to say. Oh, that's functional. Oh, that's functional. Oh yeah, training on top of a bozu ball with one leg up in the air and holding a dumbbell above your head. It's functional. But to each their own. But there is something that has been like brewing, and it's something that kind of blew me away, which is about the stretch. Which we're going to get there because I want to ask you one question that one of the members in the Mother Strong League asked, and then you're going to be able to elaborate on that. Her question is it better to stretch at the beginning of the workout, at the end, or both? Go for
Okay. So we have to define what stretching is and what the purpose or the goal of performing stretching is. So stretching is essentially taking your joint, the muscle and the ligaments in the joint to the end range that you have available and holding it there and pushing it a little bit beyond the comfort. Okay. Now, we have to ask ourselves before we do anything related to answering the question of when is it better to do it, is what is the purpose of stretching? So there's a common misconception that stretching actually changes the length of the tissue. And what stretching is not doing is changing the length of the tissue properties. So and I'm talking about like the muscle fibers, the tendons, the ligament fibers, the joint capsule. It's not having any impact physically on the physiological properties of the tissue. Mm-hmm. The reason is because, and I'm going to kind of go in like a gross direction. It's not really gross. It's just raw meat direction. Let's say you get like a pork tenderloin or a chunk of like not trimmed chicken, right? There's this fascia around it, or there's these little like stringy things that you can't.
Can you explain what fascia is?
Yeah, sure. Fascia is the tissue that encapsulates our muscles.
Okay.
And essentially it's in between our muscles and connects all of our muscles together. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have fascia, we'd have these like weird bulges. I mean, we can have weird bulges if we're really muscular, but it encapsulates the muscles and kind of keeps it compartmentalized.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it has to be really strong. Okay. Now, if you take a regular kitchen knife and you start to cut pieces of fascia or those like, those stringy things that you see on chicken that you can't chew, that are really hard to cut. Yeah. You might have to take a kitchen scissor to cut them, right? Yeah, but we have that inside our body and you can't deform that. It takes thousands of pounds of pressure to deform it. That's why like when a doctor goes in and performs surgery, they use scalpels, which are very sharp. If our tissue, if our muscles, tendons, ligaments, and bones were so easily deformable, we would break all the time. Okay. Right? So when you're stretching, you are not changing the length of the muscle. So that's a really great question. So what's actually happening is there's this neurophysiological effect. So essentially you're causing a temporary change in sensation to that area of the body. So our flexibility is controlled by our neurological system, our neuromuscular system. So the degree to which we can stretch. So like, let's say someone has really tight hamstrings. Okay. If you put that person under anesthesia, you could probably put their leg behind their head. Okay. Even though they can't touch their toes. Okay. So what this shows us is that our neurological system is controlling the length of our muscles, not the actual muscle tissue itself. Yeah, there's going to be different across everyone, like, and you put them all under anesthesia, not everybody's leg is going to be able to get behind their head. However, this does show us that it's a neurological hold on our muscles that's controlling the extensibility that we have.
So what you're saying is that stretching does not improve performance?
No, I'm talking, so we'll get there. We're talking about stretching not having an influence on the length of the actual muscle. Okay. So let's take someone who is a dancer. Okay. You see them stretching on a regular basis. They can get their head between their legs. They can get their leg over their head, all that kind of stuff. That's because the dancer spends a lot of time relaxing into their stretches, and then they take that temporary change in their relaxation of the muscle or the feeling of the muscle, and then they go and use it in that range. Okay. So
let me just see if I get it correct, because like sometimes I think for somebody who is not in the field, just making it simple makes it a bit easier to understand. So basically what you're saying is that the stretch is only important if the performance involves stretching.
yes. So essentially the question about when should we stretch? So when stretching really doesn't influence your range of motion is if you just wake up, or let's say it's the middle of the day and you say, I want to work on my hamstring length. So you do a couple toe touches, you reach for your toes, you count to 33 times, and then you're like, that's good. That's enough for stretching today. Tomorrow I'll be able to improve that. That's not going to hold. You'll have a temporary improvement in the length of your in the ability to stretch your hamstring, to the ability to move through a larger range of motion. Now, if you don't go and then use that and train that extra range of motion that you've just achieved 5 minutes ago, then you're going to lose it essentially. So what happens is, when is the right time to stretch? If you really want to influence how your joint extensibility, your muscle extensibility, you want to stretch and then load. Okay. So especially in the sense of static stretching or static holds. So static stretching, I actually like to use, and I only do this in a sense where the person has a pathological issue with their range of motion that's influencing their ability to appropriately perform what they're supposed to perform. Mm-hmm. So we as humans we have functional ranges of motion. So like reaching up into the counter, into the cabinet to get something out of the cabinet, or reaching down to put our socks on. We need that range of motion in order to achieve activities of daily living and activities of daily care, right? So that's functional range of motion. Then we move into our sport-specific range of motion and our sport-specific flexibility. So what a dancer needs is much more flexibility than what a powerlifter or a bodybuilder needs. So a bodybuilder does not, unless you're a physique competitor or a fitness competitor, you don't need to put your head between your legs. You don't need to fold yourself into a pretzel. You don't need to, put one, I don't know, like crazy things. You're not in the circus. You just need a healthy balance of range of motion in your joints in order to achieve the physique that you're looking to achieve. The same thing goes for a powerlifter versus a CrossFitter. A CrossFitter has a lot of gymnastics requirements. They do muscle ups, they do handstand walk, they do handstand push-ups and walk on their hands. They do kipping pull-ups, they do the Olympic lifts. What else do they do? Yeah, really the Olympic lifts is where it comes. But a power lifter, they squat, they bench press, and they deadlift. So there's this continuum of flexibility, right? So on one end, you have a power lifter. I'm sure there's a golfer, a power, like whatever, it's limited range of motion. You don't need that much. And then you have on the other end, a gymnast or dancer. Yeah. So, and it's also the same thing as a strength continuum. You need to have enough strength to control that end range. Yeah. Okay. So having too much flexibility as a power lifter or too much flexibility as a bodybuilder can actually be detrimental to you. Mm-hmm. But not having enough to perform the tasks of your sport can also be detrimental. I hate using the word detrimental because I don't want to kind of catastrophize it. Like, you're not going to die. You're not going to really always hurt yourself if you don't have it. But when we look at someone who might have a discrepancy from one side to the other, we're going to want to address it, right? Yeah. So in the sense of static stretching, so static means you put yourself in a position and you hold it for 10 to 30, static stretching. Put yourself in a position and hold it there. Okay. In the sense of static stretching, what I like to do is recommend that people do it while they're training or on their warm-up sets. Wow. So that we have this temporary change in range of motion because of the release of the neurophysiological hold that we're having on the muscle. So we're changing the nervous system. And then we have this improvement, this temporary improvement in range of motion. And then we go and load it. So we're training that new range of motion.
With you now. Okay.
So that's where in my professional opinion, that's where static stretching has its place. It doesn't have its place in the middle of the day. I mean, you can, because it makes you feel good. You know, and who doesn't want to feel good? But it's not if you're just stretching to feel good, it's not changing the extensibility of your muscle.
There is no physiological benefit to stretching, which then brings me, what is your pre-lift routine? If you don't do static stretches, as most people think that that's what you should do, what do you do? What is your pre-lift routine?
Yeah, so pre-exercise, we want to do something called a dynamic warm-up. And I say warm-up because it doesn't just include stretching. So it does include dynamic stretching, but the dynamic warm-up is going to, a warm-up or pre-lift routine functions for many reasons, or has multiple functions. One, it's to increase your heart rate. 2, increase your body temperature. 3, increase your respiratory rate. So you're going to start to bring in a little bit more oxygen. And lastly, it has an influence on your neurological system. So your neuromotor system, that's the connection between your brain and your muscles. Okay. So the dynamic warm-up functions to prepare you to move and to prepare you to perform well. Okay.
It's almost like a little poke. Hey, we're about to start something a bit more serious.
Exactly.
Because like probably if you go from like, oh, wake up and then go stand under the bar and then try to do a lift, your body's going to be like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing?
Right. So you say wake up. So I like to use this as an example, or why, when is a dynamic warm up more important and when is it not as important? So let's say you're one of those people that has to get all of your training in before work at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So you wake up at 4:30, you roll out of bed, you get your protein oats, overnight oats from the refrigerator, you drink it on the way to the gym, and you're like still yawning as you're walking into the gym. You've just been going from this 8 hours of rest and relaxation state, and now you're like, okay, I gotta lift some weights, get some shit done. You have this like minimal transition from sleep to like most awake possible, right? So the dynamic warm-up is actually more important for someone who's training in the morning than it is for someone, let's say, who's gone through their day, they've been running after their kids all day, they've gone to the supermarket, they've gone to work, they've been like stimulated all day, and then they're going into the gym. And you can see this with a lot of people. They say, I have such better workouts later in the day, but I don't have time to work out later in the day. And the reason they're having better workouts is because their brain, their neurological system has been stimulated for an extended period of time. Now, of course, you can then be too tired to train, at the end of the day, like really late at night, you start to see a decrease in performance. But a dynamic warm-up functions to prepare you, wake you up to train.
Okay.
Now, in the sense of a dynamic warm-up, you're going to want to do dynamic stretching. That does have an influence on Yeah, exactly. So a dynamic warm-up, a lot of times people are like, oh, my back hurts so much when I train. I'm like, are you warming up? They're like, no, I'm not warming up. I'm like, okay, try a dynamic warm-up and let's see how your back feels. And they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better.
Which then brings me to injury prevention, because ultimately that's what a lot of people think that stretching does. Would a general warm-up, like a dynamic warm-up, help with injury prevention? Or do you think it's better to perform like a regional warm-up? Like, for example, let's say you're going to do squats, then do 50 air squats.
So, okay, first, I want to say that nothing is going to help with injury prevention. And this is not on you, but there's a really common misconception that we can prevent injuries. We cannot prevent injuries. So a better way to think about it is injury risk reduction. So let's
I love
Can you, yeah. So, I mean, and this is my classic way to describe this is you can look both ways before you cross the street and still get hit by a car that you didn't see coming. So we can do everything right, but still things go south. You know, you can have the best technique, you can have the best program, you could be using lightweight, you know, and you can still get injured. You know, this just happened to one of the girls who comes to she trains in person with me. I have like small barbell groups in my garage, and she was doing 95 pounds on the deadlift, which is her first warm-up set. And she just, everything like looked perfect. There was nothing wrong. And it was 95 pounds, and she tweaked her back, you know, and so you can do everything right. You can look both ways before you cross the street, but you can never prevent something random from happening.
And with that being said, just quick question, just because I think he fits here. My husband played professional rugby for 15 years. And like some crazy injuries or tweaks that he's had have been unloading the dishwasher. His back went into a spasm in the day of a game when he was unloading the dishwasher, and he couldn't walk.
Yeah. So this is, you know, this is a conversation that I have regularly with people, and they're always trying to understand why. Well, there's not always a reason why, you know, sometimes shit just happens. You know, we're living a lot longer than we used to live 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago. You know, we are just living longer, and we're more active, and we have more medicine than we ever had in the past. So we're seeing things like, you know, like you can do everything. You think you can do everything right and prevent cancer, but you can't.
So for prevention, do you think what is best? Dynamic warm-up, or for example performing the exercise with less load or with body weight, or would that be considered a dynamic warm-up? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so that would be considered part of a dynamic warm-up. So in powerlifting, for example, like if I'm going to squat 300 pounds for my workout, I'm not just going to do a dynamic warm up where I'm doing some butt kicks and like jumping jacks and then put 300 pounds on my back. So the barbell warm up is part of your dynamic warm up. Okay. So essentially, and that's the like graduating the nervous system to the load that you're going to work with that day. It becomes more important the larger the heavier the load is relative to what you can actually what you can lift, or what the act. So for instance,
what your max is, like,
yes, for instance, like with a 5-pound bicep curl, do you have to do 1 pound first? No. But with a 35-pound dumbbell curl, if you're your size, you'd probably want to do 2 or 3 sets with lighter load before you pick up the 35-pound dumbbell.
Yeah.
So yes, that would be considered part of a dynamic warm-up. So typically the way that I like to structure dynamic warm-ups is, especially it's going to be different depending on how much time you have, how you respond to training, and whether it's the morning or the night or middle of the day or whatever. Excuse me. So let's say you're working out in the morning, or you tend to run on the stiffer side, or you've been sitting all day at work. I would say, 5 to 10 minutes on a piece of cardio equipment if it's available. I personally like the bike or the treadmill really a lot. And then you want to move your joints through general ranges of motion and hold those stretches. So like butt kicks, high knees, Spider-Man walks, inchworms, things that just move your body through larger ranges of motion than you were doing for the last couple of hours. And also stretch your muscles just a little bit so that you feel good and can move through, that allows your nervous system to move through larger ranges of motion. Better your warm-up is, and the more neurologically prepared you are to handle the load for the day, the more you've done to set yourself up for a good outcome.
Okay.
If you were just to go in, do like one set with the bar, then put 400 pounds on your back. Like that would probably not, I mean, listen, if you're adapted to it, some people, that's just what they do. And some people can get away with it. But again, you have to look at who's doing it, how long they've been doing it, what performance enhancing drugs they might be taking.
Another thing is like, is 400 their max? Because if 400 is not their, it's like way below their max, that can be quote unquote a warm up kind of stuff. Not that nobody's going to warm up with 400 pounds, but you know.
Well, so I actually like one of the first people that I ever worked with remotely, so like for remote rehab coaching, he had a massive blowout of both of his knees. He was this like very, very famous powerlifter, blew his knees out at the LA Fit Expo. And then we were kind of like working him back up to after he had all of his surgeries and like working him back up. And I was like, you know, tell me a little bit about what your warm-ups for your like 600-pound squats are like. He's like, oh yeah, I start with 405. And I was like, well, maybe if you started with something lighter, you know, we can't go back. So we can just go forward. So, yeah. So for, let's say like for someone like you who may be going in and doing like the power squat or the hack squat, and maybe like, let's take you as an example. If you were doing like a leg movement, what's like your main leg movement for whatever, like this week?
Well, I did like today, I did the hack squat. I started with, like, I did that, but without thinking much about that I was doing that. I started with a lighter load to see how I felt, go through the full range of motion. I was like, okay, that felt good. And then I added more, I added more, 90 pounds more. And then I was like, okay, that felt good. And I added 50 more. And then that's what I finished at.
Exactly. So essentially you want to kind of like so essentially how it should be is like, let's say you have your top load in mind, right? So let's say you wanted to do 200 pounds.
Just say 320, which was.
Okay. All right. There you go. 320. So that's pretty awesome. So let's say you knew that you were going to go up to 320. So essentially you want to take like 4 or 5 evenly spaced jumps up until that weight, but you want to start with like higher reps, maybe like 5 to 10 reps, and decrease the reps as you get towards your top set. So you might do 2 sets of 5 with the empty machine just to kind of go through the motion. So on the lighter sets, like on the warm-up sets, you don't want to fatigue yourself. So you want to be careful with your warm up to the top set, that you're not overperforming and over fatiguing yourself by the time you get to the top set. So you want to find a healthy balance of moving through the range of motion and feeling the load, graduating to the load, but doing like less than half the reps that you're going to do with your work set. So for instance, you said you did 320 for a set of 10, or maybe you did a couple sets of 10 or whatever, but you started with 15, 10, like 15, and then you did 10s. What I would recommend and this would probably improve your performance with the 320, it wouldn't feel as heavy because you wouldn't be as fatigued by the time you got there. Because don't forget, all those sets that you're doing it's volume and it's load. So it's work, right? So you want to do, like, I'll just give for myself on the squat, for example. Let's say I'm working up to 315. I'll do 2 sets of 10 with the empty bar. I'll put 135 pounds on, do a set of 5. I'll put 185 pounds on, do a set of 3. Then I'll do 225, do a set of 3. Then I'll do 275 for 1.
Uh-huh.
And then I'll do 315 for my working sets. So you graduate the load, so you increase the load and decrease the reps as you're warming up. So that you're preparing yourself neurologically to work with the load that you're going to work with, but you're not fatiguing yourself while you're doing that.
And now we're going to move on to recovery. Do you think that stretching, any type of stretching, helps with recovery?
In a physiological sense, probably not.
Okay.
In a feel-good sense, sure.
Okay.
So the best thing for recovery is sleep, nutrition, and staying active.
And what do you suggest doing for somebody who has like what to do for muscle soreness? Like somebody is very sore, and then what you always hear is like, oh, we stretch a little bit and then foam roll.
So, like I said, listen, there's nothing wrong with stretching or foam rolling if it feels good. But if you're relying on it to cause a change or do something for you other than feel good, then you have the wrong idea. So what I suggest for someone who has a lot of muscle soreness is to move. Go for a walk. Don't skip your workout. Typically, if you're very sore and then you actually go work out, so you're like, maybe you're supposed to do 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, and you did your first day and you're so sore, go in and don't skip that second day. Go in and do it, because typically moving, increasing your body temperature, moving, exercising typically tends to reduce the symptoms of delayed onset muscle soreness, or at least you feel good temporarily. There's nothing that you can do to decrease soreness. It kind of just has to run its course. What?
It's a bit like a cold.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is that if you're chronically sore, you should ask yourself, why am I chronically sore? Am I under eating? Am I not getting enough recovery? Like, am I not sleeping well enough? Is there something in my program? Like, is it too much? Are the loads too heavy? Is it too much volume? Am I not adapted to it? Or there could be something else going on that you need to like go see the doctor for.
For the you said that you go work out, but whenever you do go work out and you're sore, obviously we're talking about a light workout just to keep on moving, not like balls to the walls kind of crazy workout when you're dying.
Well, yes and no. I mean, especially if you have like a split program or you're training different areas of your body. So like, let's say you have an upper back day, an upper back and biceps day on Monday, and then you have a leg day on Tuesday, and your biceps are crazy sore and your lats are really sore. Go in and still do your leg workout, because moving is still going to create blood, like better blood flow through your body, and typically you'll feel better. So it's not don't train. It's like if you're training different areas of the body, it's fine. But also it's okay to train the same. Like I squat and deadlift almost every training. Well, I like squat one day and I deadlift the next day. They're still using the same muscles. I might be really sore from squatting, but training again the next day and using those similar movement patterns is not going to like hurt you.
Okay.
So I wouldn't, unless you're like so sore that like something feels wrong, then I wouldn't necessarily skip a workout just because you're sore.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on foam rolling and trigger point treatment?
Again, it's not doing it's literally, and I cannot stress this enough, there's so many studies that show us that foam rolling and trigger point release are not actually doing anything to the tissue other than causing a neurophysiological effect. So basically changing the way that your brain perceives how you're feeling, which causes a temporary change in your ability to move well. So essentially it just makes you feel good for a little while, but it's not fixing anything.
Thank you. Because I remember I sent you a message yesterday, and just to tell everybody here, me and my husband, we got in like a legit marital argument last night, and I messaged Rori, and I was like, this is an honor thing. I need to know, because he was like, my husband comes from the professional sports background, and everything's foam rolling and stretching, foam rolling and stretching. And then I was trying to explain to him that it doesn't improve performance. And oh, well, what do you do for muscle soreness then? So a lot of these questions are actually based on the discussion I had with him last night, because I was like, because it's not doing anything, makes you feel good, and that's about it. So I think this is great.
Yeah, I mean, it legitimately, all it does is make you feel good. And because it makes you feel good, you move better.
And how is it that even though there is so much evidence that supports that foam rolling and stretching are a waste of your time from a physiological and performance standpoint, why is there so many things being sold?
Because people believe anything, and it's literally just marketing. That's what it is.
They have like the Theragun, like
Theragun, yeah, no.
Like, and I'm in no way affiliated, like I have nothing to do with any of them. And I just see all these people using it. I'm like, what are you doing? Why? Like, why? And nobody can explain me why they're using it.
There's no reason other than it's like, looks cool, and it's marketing, and it's shiny and fancy, and people like shiny and fancy things.
And it's
yeah. Well, basically what Theragun did was they literally sent like 1,000 of them out to like influencers. And that's basically like how it became popular. There's no evidence to support that the Theragun is changing anything on a physiological level at all.
Okay, now to back pain question, which I think that we have addressed kind of this, but these were some questions from members. How to prevent back pain, especially when training legs?
So again, like, we can't prevent back pain, and I know we've talked about it. I know that the question actually, like, that's what she wrote. So so basically, there are things that we can do to decrease the potential for things to happen. But essentially what happens is we get injured when our bodies are not adapted to the load or the volume or the movement that we're doing. So if you move the wrong way or something changes while you're executing an exercise under moving load, that's typically when we can get hurt. So one thing, especially for the spine, when it comes to like the squat and the deadlift, or any like one, or any type of movement variation that stems from the squat or the deadlift, is, we want to keep our spine in a stable position. And I don't mean create spinal stability. Essentially, we don't want to allow our spine position to change while we're moving under load. So essentially hold your, like, even if you have a round back, like everybody talks about like a round back deadlift being so bad for you. Now, I wouldn't teach someone to do a round back deadlift, but if you're adapted to holding your spine in that position while you're deadlifting, then it shouldn't cause a problem. Now, if your spine position goes from flat while you're pulling 225 pounds and then it starts to round, you have the potential to become injured if it's too much for your body to handle.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get injured, but it's when we have too much load or too much volume and a change in a movement pattern altogether or separately that can cause an injury. So essentially, we're just not adapted to what is happening to us at that time.
That's brilliant. And I really like that you talked about the rounded back, because if you look at a lot of powerlifters and stuff like that, the back is very rounded, and nobody's going to walk to a man that is like deadlifting God knows how many pounds and be like, you see what you're doing there might not be right. Like, look at a strong man as well. Like the way they pick up the what is it called? The big ball, like weight ball.
The Atlas stone.
Yeah, the way they pick that up, their backs, it's completely rounded when they pick it up.
But they're adapted to it.
Yes.
So they're training to do that. So it's when our bodies are not prepared enough for what's happening to it, that's kind of like when injuries happen.
Which I find it very interesting to kind of like relate to the audience and to the people and like in my program, is that ultimately exercising a lot of times, it doesn't have a lot to do just with the way you're going to look, but you need to know how to move with load in these specific movements, because you're going to be doing that with your kids. You're going to be holding kids when you're moving up and down and doing like holding it above your head. If you're not prepared to do that by working out, chances are you're probably going to injure yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw there was a question about someone, I know that you put that she has well, here, let's not look at that question. We'll just talk about, so like, let's say you actually.
The next question, I'm going to ask that. So it's from Maria as well. What can be done to help ease lower back pain after the baby? Is this that one?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One, exercise, obviously. That's going to be like our number one go-to always. But so, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know this particular person. I can't speak specifically to that person and why she's having back pain after birth, but we do want to look at, are we, especially after giving birth. So this is very unique to the postpartum female, is that we do, and I don't intentionally program core on a regular basis for most of my athletes, because the squat, bench press, deadlift, overhead press, all those exercises center around your core anyway. So you're always training your core when you're doing those exercises. However, after giving birth, your core definitely needs to be trained specifically. And this comes back to essentially stress adaptation. So that's how we get stronger. We create a small stress that our body is unadapted to. Again, I said small stress. So remember, we talked about injuries happening when we're not adapted to a stress. So we're not prepared for that amount of stress. So essentially the way that we get stronger is we cause a little bit of a disruption in our body, a little bit of stress, and then we recover from it over a 24 to 48 hour period. And then we're a little bit stronger. So that same stress, if we did it again, we would be adapted to it. So we have to kind of progressively overload. And that's what we have to do with the core after we have a baby. Okay. And maybe you were able to hold a plank for a minute on your elbows and on your toes before you had the baby, but now just doing a plank on your elbows and your knees is really hard. So there should, I don't know, like 15 months is a long time, like it's been over a year since she's had the baby, but if there was never that like, regression on core strength training after pregnancy, then that's probably somewhere where you need to go in order to rebuild and decrease the back pain, which can be, sorry.
And I love that you're saying that, because that's something that I get. And because people have that image that core training is crunches, sit-ups, and like that's all, leg raises, and that's all you can do. But whenever you're talking about the postnatal population, even like, I don't know, tabletop. A tabletop is a core exercise that does exactly what you're talking about. It works the progressive overload. So then maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months down the line, they'll be able to do the crunches. They'll be able to go back to the planks they were doing. They'll be able to like perform better because their core was properly progressively overloaded.
Yes, so it'd be worth seeing a women's health physical therapist. So with the postpartum population, and I talked about that core care, and this is kind of why women tend to have problems after they give birth, is because there's no like restoration of their core after. Like there's no main focus on like, oh, let's like recondition ourselves to put ourselves in the right position. So typically after, in the postpartum period, when you're like kind of cleared for exercise, but you can even do this in like the first 4 weeks after giving birth. If there were like no complications and there was really no issues, no extra bleeding, no cesarean section, you can start with transverse abdominis contractions. And people still do this wrong because they take a big breath in and they bear down, but that's not a transverse abdominis contraction. So essentially what?
That's a crunch.
That's a crunch and that's a push. That's a push your baby out. That's a push pee out. That's a push your shit out kind of thing. So essentially, I'll walk you through this. If you put your hand on your belly and you take a big breath in and you fill your belly with air, and then you exhale and pull your belly. And this is not like rounding your back. This is just exhaling and pulling your belly muscles tight. That's a transverse abdominis contraction. And you can get really lightheaded when you do this, and that's good. That means you're doing it correctly. So I'll have women lying on the ground and I'll be like, I know you're dizzy, just keep going.
Yeah.
So it's that and you should really feel everything tighten in the center of your body. That's a transverse abdominis contraction, and that's what you need to start with like 2 weeks after giving birth.
Okay.
Um,
That's good. It's interesting because I like, even within my program, I have like the 0 to 6 weeks plan, which that's basically it. Like just kind of explaining how to breathe and the exercise to do to breathe. Okay, next question, because I know you have to go too. Is there an ideal position to sleep to avoid back pain?
no.
No, okay. Whatever is comfortable for you.
Exactly. Whatever's comfortable.
Okay, hot or cold for back pain?
Was it back pain or knee pain?
Back pain.
It depends. So if you, okay, let's just go to that like really bad injury where like you tweaked your back and you can't bend over, you can't stand up, every move that you make hurts, but you have to go to work. Okay. Therapatches. So these you can get at like CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, whatever. Therapatches, they can stick right on your back, on your skin. They stay warm for 12 hours. They can reduce muscle tension, and they help reduce that tightness and produce discomfort relief, essentially. Typically for back pain, if you're in the acute phase, so ice and heat essentially don't do anything after like an acute injury, if you're in the chronic phase. So if you've had back pain for like 6 months, ice and heat aren't really doing anything. They're pain modulators in the acute stage. Okay. And they're going to allow you to kind of like move through your daily life, even though you have this like crazy back pain. So if it's like for the first 24 hours after a back tweak, alternating ice and heat for like ice no more than 20 minutes, like really no more than 20 minutes, like take it off after 20 minutes. And then you can do heat. Just be careful about not leaving it on for too long and causing skin burns.
Okay.
So alternating ice and heat in an acute phase.
Knee pain. I'm having recurring problems with my knees. Any sort of lunge loading through the knee joint hurts like hell. So it's limiting what I can do in leg day. When the pain starts up, it can be there for around a week or so. 1, how can I prevent further injury while continuing to improve? And 2, to recovery stages, are there any specific stretches or techniques I could be doing, or even stuff 100% should stay clear of?
So typically knee pain happens when we can't really know unless we're like a magnetic resonance imaging, an MRI machine. We can't know like what's going on inside your knee, but we can really listen to symptoms. So if particular movements hurt, either modify them to a different range of motion. So maybe not do the full range of motion, or use a different exercise to kind of achieve the same thing that doesn't cause knee pain. But also typically knee pain happens when we have the weight, not that your knees can go past your toes. That's not when we get knee pain. It's when our weight shifts to the front of our foot. So for all exercises that we do for anything, we want to keep our weight, our center of mass, distributed over the whole foot or the center of the foot. So typically you'll tend to see people kind of develop knee injuries or aches and pains in their knees if they're always shifting to the front of their foot and bearing weight on the ball of their foot rather than distributing it over their whole foot. So 1, you want to look at your exercise mechanics. Are you doing something that's kind of facilitating knee pain by shifting forward is your heel coming up? Are you shifting forward into the front of your foot? So are you evenly distributed? Then what is the range of motion? Is it the range of motion that's the issue? Is there a technique issue? Or are you doing too much? Like, is it the volume? So we can play around with this programming and technique to see like what it is, and essentially like the range of motion of the lift as well. But I wouldn't say stop. The only thing that I would say stop doing is stop doing the exercise or the movement that's aggravating it, and change it so that you can accomplish the same thing without necessarily aggravating your knee.
Or even like before, as you said, before stopping, try different range of motion. And like, for example, if it's a lunge, maybe try going wider or shorter and see what works best. And if any of them like reduce the pain, would that be?
Yeah, we actually just on the Pro Rehab Instagram page, we literally just made a post about this, like what you can do to like work through these like aches and pains in training. There's like a kind of like a stepwise approach actually on the Instagram right now. So you can link that post if you want.
Rory, thank you so much for your time. I mean, this has been amazing. Like we covered everything.
I
And
know. I can't be literally covered everything on the list. Oh,
yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. Thank you so, so much. I appreciate
you're
your time.
welcome.
And
Thank
and then I'll link to the things that we talked about. I'll message you and ask you for the links. And then
you. Sure.
I'll link to your Instagram and your website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.